today we're gonna do a special treat for homecoming week. What are we gonna do, Dr. Roberson?
Since this is, I was asked to do something Mardi Gras themed, we're gonna do beignets, which is essentially a Cajun donut. So I'm going to show you guys how to make donuts from scratch, more or less.
Yeah, and you know, when he was thinking of somebody to help him out, he thought, let's get the guy from the middle of America who has never been remotely close to New Orleans until this year.
Yeah.
This guy. So let's go ahead and get cracking, because we got an egg, right? Huh?
Beignets are awesome. They're basically, donuts are interesting because it's one of those things that every culture in the world has. Every culture in the world has some variation of a deep fried ball of dough rolled in sugar. So anywhere, the Vietnamese have them, Chinese have them, in Korean or in Cajun food and French food, everybody makes a donut. So I'm going to show you how to make a Cajun donut. So pretty simple stuff here. I'm going to start. I've got 3 cups of all-purpose flour in the mixer. Put it all in there. Next, I have 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt. Salt is important even when you're doing something sweet like donut because the salt provides a counterpoint to the sweetness. You actually perceive it more. If you have a little bit of salt in there, you'll taste the rest of it more so. We have 2 tablespoons of sugar. They go in there. So this is going to be a sweet dough. So here for this stuff, we use a paddle attachment, put it on the mixer, and I just want this to mix up. You know, this is just dry ingredients here, so it's just a little bit to get it all incorporated together.
Yeah, and considering that they're all white substances, it's kind of hard to tell when you got it mixed.
All right, I have a cup of whole milk here.
And that's going to be warmed up, and you don't want to use cold milk on this.
Yeah, it's about 100 degrees, so it's body temperature. And the reason for that is, Matt, I've got a whisk right here. Okay. So I've got the cup of whole milk. I have, all the sugar. 2 tablespoons of sugar, or 1 tablespoon of sugar here. I put 2 tablespoons of sugar in here. So I've got a tablespoon of sugar in here in the whole milk. And the reason for doing that is because the next ingredient I'm going to add is yeast.
And yeast doesn't exactly like to have the cold.
So yeah, the yeast is, as it sits now, it's inactive. But when it hits the warm milk, it will actually start to grow and multiply. And what the yeast does, when it multiplies, it's going to give off carbon dioxide and also makes alcohol. The carbon dioxide is what makes the little bubbles in the bread. That's what's going to make your donuts puff up rather than being flat like a cracker. So if I put this in cold milk, the yeast isn't going to multiply. So I'm going to have a flat donut. Nobody wants to do a flat donut. So we're going to let this sit in the warm milk and sugar. The sugar, there is a little bit of sugar in the milk naturally, lactose. But this gives the yeast something to eat. So it'll reproduce, it'll grow, it'll make our donuts fluffy and taste good. Okay, so this has to sit for about 5 minutes until it gets foamy. I guess you can't really see in there, but you'll see that the yeast is starting to grow. It's starting to get a little bit of growth on the top. Okay, now we'll wait for a few minutes.
So here in action is the foaming process that we talked about with the yeast. An egg in there.
So I'm going to add an egg to the milk and yeast mixture. And I'm just going to whisk that in to incorporate so that it is fully mixed. So I've got my egg, milk, yeast mixture there. I'm going to drag this mixer over here under the mirror so you can see. And I am going to add this to our flour, sugar, salt mixture. Now one thing you always want to be careful about when you're using yeast, like there's salt in here, but if you notice, one of the things I did was I incorporated the salt into the flour before I poured the yeast in. The salt is actually will kill the yeast. The yeast is alive. So if I were to pour it directly onto the salt, it's possible it would kill part of the yeast and then it will never rise. So by mixing the salt in, I don't let that happen. So I'm going to mix this for just a little bit on a very low speed. I am just incorporating it so that there are no big chunks. I'm probably going to go for maybe 30 seconds. I'm going to create what's called a shaggy dough, which is, you can see where it's pulling apart, it's not fully mixed. It's kind of a very rough looking dough. So at this point, and you can do this by hand, I just happen to have access to the tools, so I'm going to do it. So I'm going to take this paddle out.
That's some shaggy dough there, right?
Yeah. So I'm going to take the paddle out, save the dough. I don't want to waste any. No, that's a donut. I'm going to put the dough hook on there. And so one of the things about flour and why we're using these different attachments, so paddle and whatnot, is that the flour contains something called gluten. And the gluten is short little fibers, but as you work it, as it gets physically turned around, they actually come together and stretch, and you get these. That's what makes bread chewy. Is that you, in order for bread to be chewy, you have to work the gluten in it. So now this dough hook, I'm going to let this go on a medium speed here for 5 minutes. Also have to add my butter. I forgot about butter. This is 3 tablespoons of melted butter.
You know, and honestly, if you forget the butter, is it really a beignet? No. No, right?
Then it's just a sad little fried piece of dough.
Pretty much. Nobody's happy with the butterless beignet.
So we're going to let this go for 5 minutes or so. I am going to take the dough hook out. The dough is ready. So Matt, there's some plastic wrap right over there. If you will just cover this bowl and set it aside.
Will do, Chef.
Yeah.
If
So
anything, I'm
this needs to rise for 2 hours. So we're going to give the dough time for the yeast to eat the sugars, produce carbon dioxide, to swell up, to do their thing. And when that's done, we will come back to it. Actually, we're not going to come back to it because I cheated. So just set that aside somewhere on camera. And when I said I cheated, what I did was last night I made dough so that I would have it today.
well played, sir. Well played.
So now I have our beignet dough. A little bit of flour, so then stick to the table. The table has been washed, rinsed, and sanitized. Here's our dough. I have the roller. I'm going to roll it out until it's about between 1/8 and 1/4 inch thick. And I want to try and get it even if I can. It's not perfect, but you do what you can.
It's not perfect, and it doesn't have to be, because it's going to be tasty.
Yeah, this is a donut. This is not art. Okay, so there we're rolled out.
Need your slices.
Yeah, with the slicer, and I need, I guess, this one. So I'm going to cut this into strips and portion it into about a dozen, roughly, donuts. Follow me to the fryer. And it's a little louder over here by the fryer. It's at 325 degrees. You can do this stove top, just making sure your oil is about 325 degrees. And if you're frying use at least 3 cups of oil. But I have a deep fryer, so I'm going to use it. So I'm just going to drop my pieces of dough in. And if you want to come over here, you can see they started to puff up and rise up. So I'm going to keep them turned over so they brown on both sides.
So you always want to use a fresh pan after you've had something with raw ingredients on it. That's why we have a separate clean one for the finished product. So one of the great things about this is you're going to want to get a bowl big enough because with the beignets, you're going to dump your powdered sugar in there. You're going to dump those inside of here. You're going to end up tossing them and coat them lightly with some powdered sugar, which makes it taste really well.
Or at home, what you can do is get a paper bag and put the powdered sugar in there and just shake them on the paper bag.
Either way.
Why don't you toss those around, let everybody try one.
Because I realize I gotta start cleaning up the grill now too, so. Roberson, I think the key is to have a trained chef do all the work while I just look good. I think that's really what
Makes it easier.
Yeah. Also, if you do not want to go ahead and put all these ingredients together yourself, there are some really great mixes out there. Easy to put together.
The Cafe Du Monde beignet mix, just add water. It is available at many grocery stores. I couldn't find it in Brunswick yesterday. You can get a 2-day delivery on Amazon and at Walmart.com.
So,
And under $5.
Thank you and happy homecoming.